Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the person you thought you were, the one who makes choices, sets goals, and claims to know what they want, is not the one actually steering the course of your life. Imagine discovering that beneath the polished exterior you present to the world lies an unacknowledged twin, a darker figure, quietly whispering in your ear, influencing your decisions, shaping your emotions, and even sabotaging the very dreams you believed were yours. What if you realized that this figure has been walking alongside you since birth, unseen yet ever present, patiently recording every unspoken desire, every forbidden thought, every emotion you were too ashamed to feel? Would you still dare to call yourself free, or would you begin to suspect that your so-called freedom is only a mask, a fragile cover for the vast underworld within? Carl Jung called this hidden figure the shadow, and he insisted it is not a metaphor, but a living psychological reality, one that shapes human existence more profoundly than most of us dare admit. Think for a moment about the times you lashed out at someone you loved, even when you swore you never would. Recall the bitter jealousy you felt when a friend succeeded, despite your conscious intention to feel happy for them, or the moments when you caught yourself lying, not for survival but for pride, convenience, or sheer habit. Where do these impulses come from? They arrive unbidden, like intruders breaking into the house of your mind. Yet they are not strangers. They are you, but not the you recognize in daylight. They belong to the part of yourself you banished to the dark. What makes this so disturbing is not merely that you carry these impulses, but that you don't choose when they emerge. A cruel remark slips from your mouth before you think. A destructive habit repeats itself even after you swear you've conquered it. A desire you judge as shameful begins to dominate your secret life, leaving you feeling split in two. You imagine yourself as the author of your own story, yet the pen seems to be gripped by a hidden hand. Who truly writes your life, you or your shadow? Jung suggested that most people live with a profound illusion, the belief that their conscious ego is the master of their house. In reality, the ego is more like a nervous diplomat, standing at the gate, trying to maintain appearances while the true ruler, the shadow, lurks in the cellar, waiting for opportunities to rise. And rise it does. Sometimes it bursts forth in anger, addiction, envy, cruelty, or even obsessive love. Other times it appears in subtler forms, passive aggression, cowardice, chronic indecision, or an inexplicable heaviness of spirit. You may try to banish it, to deny its existence, to declare, "That is not me." But denial only gives it more power. The shadow feeds on repression. Now pause and ask yourself, how much of your life is actually lived in reaction to this hidden force? How many of your choices are not truly free decisions, but attempts to silence, appease, or disguise the shadow within? Is your ambition really your own, or is it driven by unacknowledged feelings of inadequacy? Is your kindness pure generosity, or does it sometimes mask a deep need to be liked and validated? When you condemn others, do you judge them for their flaws, or do you secretly recognize in them what you cannot face in yourself? Here lies the paradox. The shadow is both your enemy and your greatest teacher. To reject it is to be ruled by it in secret. To face it is to risk discovering truths about yourself you may not be ready to know. What could be more terrifying than realizing that the qualities you despise in others are precisely those you repress within yourself? And yet, what could be more liberating than finding out that hidden within the shadow is not only your darkness, but also your untapped vitality, your creativity, your raw and unfiltered power? This is the great question Jung forces us to confront. Are you living as the person you think you are, or as the person you cannot bear to admit you might be? And if it is the latter, what does that mean for the life you are building, the relationships you cling to, and the destiny you believe is yours? The shadow is not content to remain buried. It speaks through your dreams, your slips of the tongue, your sudden urges, and your inexplicable fears. It calls to you in the faces of the people you despise, in the stories that disturb you, in the traits of others that you insist are unacceptable. The more you try to bury it, the more urgently it knocks at the door of your consciousness, demanding to be recognized. But few have the courage to open that door. Imagine if every decision you thought was rational, every moral stance you believed was yours, every mask you wore to protect yourself. Imagine if all of it was merely a negotiation with the darkness you refuse to see. Would you dare to face it? Or would you, like most, cling to the illusion of control, even while knowing deep down that something else pulls the strings? The truth is unsettling. You cannot escape your shadow. You can only choose to meet it or be ruled by it. And so the stage is set for a journey inward, one that is not for the faint of heart, a journey into the dark corridors of the psyche where the shadow waits, patient and unrelenting, until you decide whether to flee or to face the truth. The more you begin to notice the shadow's presence, the more disquieting a realization emerges. This hidden force is not an accident of your psychology, nor a quirk you can iron out with discipline or self-help tricks. It is woven into the very fabric of human consciousness, a necessary counterpart to the light of the ego. Carl Jung argued that the shadow forms because human beings are forced, from the earliest days of childhood, to make brutal compromises. You are not born into a world that accepts every part of you. From the very beginning, you are told, often without words, that some impulses are acceptable while others must be silenced. Parents reward obedience and punish rebellion. Teachers value compliance and scold unruliness. Society praises politeness and condemns rage. In order to survive, you learn to split yourself. You construct a persona, the agreeable, socially digestible version of yourself, and push the rest underground. But the underground never disappears. It simply becomes the shadow. Psychology suggests this process is unavoidable. A child who grows up feeling anger but is told that anger is bad learns to repress it. The anger doesn't vanish. It becomes unconscious, emerging later as passive aggression, explosive outbursts, or psychosomatic illness. Similarly, a child taught that ambition is selfish may grow up humble on the outside, yet secretly envious and resentful when others succeed. Jung compared this repression to stuffing contraband into a bag you carry everywhere. The bag gets heavier, and its contents more dangerous the longer you refuse to open it. Eventually, the bag bursts, often in ways that shock not only others, but also yourself. Philosophy deepens this picture. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of what happens when human instincts are denied. He called Christianity, for instance, a morality of resentment, suggesting that much of its emphasis on meekness and humility arose from repressed will and strength. Instead of admitting the desire for power, people disguised it as virtue, calling their weakness moral superiority. But beneath the disguise, the raw desire remained, warping itself into envy, hatred, and self-deception. Nietzsche's insight aligns with Jung's. Whatever we deny in ourselves does not vanish, but returns in distorted, dangerous forms, the shadow. Tao is the distorted reflection of everything the ego refuses to integrate. Arthur Schopenhauer, decades before Jung, described human beings as slaves to the will, an irrational, blind force that drives our actions regardless of reason. To Schopenhauer, the rational mind is like a rider who thinks he is steering the horse, but the horse, the will, determines the path. Jung reframed this in psychological terms. The shadow is one manifestation of that blind will. It erupts when you least expect it, reminding you that beneath the illusion of self-control lies a deeper, more ancient force. Consider how this hidden dynamic shapes identity. You grow up believing you are a good person, a rational thinker, or a caring friend. But these identities are fragile. They are masks, what Jung called the persona. The persona allows you to function in society, but it comes at a cost. Everything that doesn't fit into the mask gets shoved into the shadow. The more rigidly you cling to your persona, the more violently your shadow will rebel. This is why people who project saintly images often hide scandalous lives. Why the righteous sometimes harbor cruelty. Why the morally upright can become cruel when threatened. The persona cracks and the shadow pours through. But why exactly do we fear our shadow so deeply? Why not simply open the bag and accept what is inside? Here lies the psychological trap. To admit the shadow is to admit that you are not who you thought you were. You would have to face the envy, cruelty, lust, cowardice, laziness, and arrogance you have spent a lifetime denying. You would have to acknowledge that your moral superiority might be a cover for insecurity, that your selflessness might be a disguised demand for validation, that your deepest fears might secretly be your most powerful desires. To face the shadow is to dismantle the very story of who you are. Jung believed that most people avoid this confrontation by projecting their shadow onto others. Instead of acknowledging your own capacity for cruelty, you condemn evil people out there. Instead of facing your own greed, you rail against the greed of others. Instead of admitting your envy, you gossip about the flaws of those you secretly admire. Projection allows you to remain good in your own eyes while unloading the shadow onto the world. But the cost is steep. You become blind to your own reality, trapped in self-deception, forever fighting enemies outside instead of confronting the war within. Aldous Huxley once observed that man has an almost infinite capacity for self-deception. The shadow is the ultimate proof. We deceive ourselves not out of malice, but out of fear. We fear the abyss of our own contradictions, the chaos that lurks beneath our carefully curated selves. Yet Jung insisted that without facing this abyss, we remain incomplete, condemned to act out our darkness unconsciously, like puppets pulled by strings we refuse to see. Jean-Paul Sartre added another dimension to this problem. He spoke of bad faith, the act of lying to oneself to avoid the terror of freedom. We tell ourselves we have no choice, that we are victims of circumstance, that we are just the way we are. But often, this is the shadow speaking, disguising itself as necessity. To admit the shadow means to admit freedom, the freedom to recognize your own destructive impulses and decide differently. But freedom terrifies. It is easier to remain blind. Thus, the hidden problem is not simply that we carry a shadow. It is that we build entire lives around avoiding it. We construct careers, relationships, moral codes, even spiritual beliefs designed to shield us from what we cannot bear to see in ourselves. We chase success not only for joy, but to silence the inner whisper of inadequacy. We cling to morality not only for justice, but to suppress our darker urges. We pursue love not only for connection, but to avoid facing our loneliness. And the tragedy is this: the more we avoid the shadow, the more power it gains. It does not rest. It waits, and it rules from beneath. This is why Jung wrote that the shadow is 90% of the unconscious. Imagine what that means. 90% of your psyche may be invisible to you, driving you from beneath the surface, shaping your life without your awareness. You are like an iceberg, conscious of only the tip, while the mass below determines your course. To confront this is to confront the staggering possibility that most of what you call yourself is a carefully managed illusion. The shadow, then, is not a minor inconvenience. It is the central problem of human existence, the split between who we are and who we believe we are. And until this split is faced, no amount of success, morality, or self-improvement can free us from its grip. But if this is the hidden root of the problem, what happens when we refuse to face it? What unseen consequences unfold in our personal lives and in society as a whole? The answer is darker and closer than we would like to believe. If the shadow is denied, if it remains unacknowledged and repressed, it does not dissolve into nothingness. It metastasizes, spilling into the fabric of our lives in ways so subtle and insidious that we often do not recognize its handiwork. The great danger of the shadow is not that it lurks in the dark corners of the psyche, but that it leaks into the world disguised as fate, as accident, as just the way things are. Its fingerprints appear in the broken patterns of our relationships, the compulsions that drive our habits, the irrational fears that hold us hostage, and the unexplainable heaviness that sometimes colors life itself. You may tell yourself that you are making rational choices, that you are pursuing happiness or stability, but look closer and you may see the shadow standing just behind you, shaping your path with invisible hands. Consider first the domain of relationships. How often do we find ourselves repeating the same toxic patterns with different people? The man who grew up with a critical parent unconsciously seeks partners who criticize him, perpetuating the wound he never confronted. The woman who repressed her anger as a child becomes entangled with partners who act out the rage she denied in herself. The shadow is a master puppeteer, pulling us into situations that force us to confront what we refuse to see. Jung observed that what we do not make conscious appears in our lives as fate. When you say, "I don't know why this always happens to me," you are often speaking the language of the shadow. The shadow also infiltrates our desires, that compulsive need to succeed, to prove oneself at any cost, Does it arise from genuine passion or from a hidden feeling of inadequacy that refuses to be acknowledged? How many careers are built not on love for the craft, but on the unconscious attempt to silence a voice that whispers, "You are not enough"? The tragedy is that no achievement ever silences that voice, because the problem was never external. Until the shadow is faced, the hunger remains insatiable. We become like Tantalus, forever reaching for fruit that recedes just beyond our grasp. On a broader level, the shadow plays out in society. Wars are not merely political disputes, they are often projections of collective shadows. A nation refuses to face its own aggression, so it demonizes another as barbaric and violent. A culture denies its greed, so it condemns another for exploitation. The Holocaust, genocides, witch hunts, and political purges are not simply the results of evil leaders. They are eruptions of collective shadows, the externalization of everything a society refuses to see in itself. Jung warned that when masses of people repress the same truths, the consequences are catastrophic. The shadow, when denied collectively, does not vanish. It becomes history's nightmare on the individual level. The unseen consequences often emerge as psychological symptoms. Repressed anger becomes depression. Repressed fear manifests as anxiety. Repressed desire turns into obsession. Neuroscience has begun to confirm what Jung intuited. The brain does not delete suppressed emotions, it stores them. They are encoded in neural circuits, ready to reactivate under stress. You may think you are over it, but the body keeps score. The shadow is not only a psychological phenomenon, it is embodied, woven into your physiology, influencing your health and vitality. Even more subtle is the way the shadow shapes perception itself. Cognitive biases, those invisible distortions in how we interpret the world, are often the shadow's fingerprints. Confirmation bias, where we only see what affirms our beliefs, is the shadow protecting the fragile ego from inconvenient truths. Projection bias, where we ascribe our own disowned feelings onto others, is the shadow masquerading as objectivity. Think of how easily we assume others harbor ill intent, when in fact it is our own hostility we cannot bear to face. We accuse others of arrogance while secretly nursing our own superiority. We condemn others for dishonesty while quietly justifying our own lies. In this way, the shadow ensures that we remain blind, trapped in illusions of righteousness while perpetuating the very flaws we despise. The cost of this blindness is profound. Unseen, the shadow erodes authenticity. You begin to live not as who you are, but as who you believe you must appear to be. Your laughter rings hollow because it hides bitterness. Your kindness becomes mechanical, an act of performance. You pursue goals that secretly drain you because they were never yours to begin with. Over time, the gap between the self you show and the self you bury widens into an unbearable tension. Some collapse under this weight, experiencing breakdowns, midlife crises, or inexplicable despair. Others numb themselves with distractions, alcohol, entertainment, constant busyness, anything to avoid the silence in which the shadow whispers. And yet the shadow's most chilling consequence is perhaps this: it steals your freedom while convincing you that you are free. You believe you are choosing your path, but your choices are often reactive, scripted by wounds you never healed. You think you are in love, but perhaps you are repeating an old trauma. You think you hate your enemy, but perhaps you are staring into your own reflection. The philosopher Kierkegaard once said that the greatest despair is not to be conscious of being in despair. Likewise, the greatest slavery is not to realize you are enslaved by your shadow. Imagine the cumulative effect of millions of individuals living under this spell, each projecting their shadows onto one another, each avoiding their own darkness while condemning others for theirs. The world begins to look like a hall of mirrors, conflict echoing endlessly, no one realizing that the enemy is within. This is why history repeats itself with such tragic regularity. The faces change, the costumes vary, but the shadow remains the same. If you look closely at your own life, you may already see its pattern. The same arguments, the same disappointments, the same failures replayed under different circumstances. They are not coincidences, they are signals. The shadow is calling attention to itself, demanding recognition. But most ignore the call, choosing comfort over truth. And so the cycle continues, generation after generation, until someone dares to break it. This, then, is the stark reality. The shadow does not simply sit in the unconscious, harmless and dormant. It shapes who you are, who you become, and the world you inhabit. It dictates your loves, your hatreds, your fears, and your ambitions. It silently decides your fate while you convince yourself you are in control. And unless you confront it, you remain its servant, bound by chains you cannot see. The question now becomes, is it possible to break free? Can one step out of the cycle of repression, projection, and unconscious repetition? Or are we doomed to be ruled forever by the shadow we cannot face? Jung believed that liberation is possible, but only for those willing to undertake the most radical act of courage, to turn inward, to rebel against the comfort of denial, and to face the darkness head-on. Imagine standing at the threshold of a locked door. Behind it lies everything you fear to admit about yourself: your anger, your envy, your cowardice, your lust, your greed, your unspoken wounds, and your strangest longings. For years you have avoided this door, decorating the hallway with portraits of who you think you are, distracting yourself with noise and light, so you never hear the knocking from the other side. But the knocking grows louder. Sooner or later you must choose. Will you continue running, or will you dare to open it? The rebellion against the shadow begins here, with a choice so terrifying that most never make it: the choice to turn toward what you have spent a lifetime fleeing. Jung insisted that the shadow cannot be destroyed. It is not an intruder in your psyche, it is part of your totality. To attempt to eradicate it is to declare war against yourself, a war you will never win. The only way forward is integration, which means making the unconscious conscious, bringing into the light what has long been buried in the dark. This is not a casual act. It requires a radical honesty, a willingness to see yourself without masks. It requires, above all, courage, for the greatest rebellion is not against society, not against authority, not even against fate. It is against the lies you tell yourself. How then do you begin? The first step is recognition. Jung emphasized the power of paying attention to dreams, slips of the tongue, and the emotions that seem disproportionate. The shadow speaks in these moments. That dream where you become violent, or the one where you betray someone you love, those are not meaningless. They are messages from the parts of yourself you refuse to face. When you overreact to a small slight, when jealousy flares irrationally, when you despise someone without clear reason, stop and ask, what is being mirrored here? What is this revealing about me that I have not admitted? Every intense reaction is a clue. Every projection is a trail back to the shadow. The second step is ownership. This is the most difficult part, for it demands that you stop blaming others and accept responsibility for the impulses you discover. If you recognize envy, admit it. I am envious. If you recognize cruelty, acknowledge it. I am capable of cruelty. Ownership does not mean acting out these impulses. It means refusing to pretend they are not yours. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, once wrote that, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Ownership is precisely this, changing the relationship you have with yourself by ceasing the futile effort to disown your own nature. The third step is dialogue. Jung developed a technique called active imagination, where one consciously engages with figures from the unconscious, including the shadow. In this process, you allow the repressed parts of yourself to speak, to express their grievances, their desires, their truths. You listen, not as a judge, but as a witness. Imagine sitting across from your shadow at a table, letting it tell you everything you never wanted to hear. This may sound strange, even absurd, but the psyche responds to imagination as if it were real. Dialogue with the shadow can unearth hidden motivations, reveal unacknowledged wounds, and release energy that has been trapped in repression. The fourth step is integration. Once you recognize and own the shadow, you must find a way to channel its energy constructively. Your aggression, when acknowledged, can become assertiveness, a capacity to protect boundaries. Your envy, when faced, can reveal what you truly desire and push you toward authentic growth. Your selfishness, when admitted, can transform into healthy self-respect. Integration is the art of turning poison into medicine. It is not about becoming good in the moral sense. It is about becoming whole, embracing the full spectrum of your humanity rather than clinging to a half-life of selective truths. History offers examples of this rebellion. Consider the Stoic philosophers who practiced daily self-examination, ruthlessly cataloging their flaws not to shame themselves but to face reality. Or look at artists like Dostoevsky, who poured the darkness of the human soul into his novels, transforming shadow material into timeless literature. Even spiritual figures like the Buddha faced the shadow. Beneath the Bodhi tree, he confronted Mara, the embodiment of temptation and fear, not by fighting, but by acknowledging him. The rebellion across traditions is always the same, to face the darkness directly and integrate its lessons. But make no mistake, this rebellion will cost you. It will cost the comfort of illusions. It will cost the ease of blaming others. It will cost the fragile image of yourself as pure or innocent. You may lose relationships that depend on your denial, careers that rely on your mask, or identities you thought were permanent. Integration destabilizes everything false. Yet what you gain is infinitely greater. Authenticity, freedom, and an energy that was once trapped in repression. Jung observed that the shadow, once integrated, becomes a source of vitality. All the strength you wasted in suppressing it is returned to you as creative power, depth, and resilience. Psychologically, this rebellion is also liberation from projection. Once you own your shadow, you stop needing to see it everywhere else. The world becomes clearer, less distorted by your hidden ends. You begin to see others not as enemies or mirrors of your own darkness, but as complex beings in their own right. Your judgments soften, your fears loosen, your envy diminishes. This does not mean you become naive or permissive. Rather, you become capable of discerning reality without the fog of your unconscious biases. You reclaim the freedom to respond rather than react. The final element of rebellion is responsibility. To integrate the shadow is not merely for personal liberation, it is an act with ethical consequences. When individuals confront their shadows, society becomes less prone to collective projection. Wars, persecutions, and witch hunts diminish when fewer people are projecting their darkness onto others. To rebel against your shadow, then, is also to rebel against the cycle of history's violence. It is an act of service to humanity itself, and yet there is a deeper paradox. The more you integrate the shadow, the more you realize that it is not simply bad. Yes, it contains your cruelty, your rage, your selfishness, but it also contains your passion, your creativity, your primal energy. It holds not only the monsters you fear, but the vitality you need. The rebellion is not against the shadow itself, but against your blindness to it. To integrate the shadow is to become more dangerous. Yes, but also more alive. As Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. The true rebel does not flee from darkness, but learns to wield it with awareness. So the door stands before you. You can keep walking the hall of illusions, decorating the walls with masks, convincing yourself that you are in control. Or you can take the key in your hand, open the door, and meet the figure waiting inside. The choice is yours. But know this, the shadow will not stop knocking, and every day you ignore it, you low. Owes a little more freedom to the darkness you refuse to see. The final, most powerful realization. Imagine for a moment that you are standing at the edge of a vast, dark ocean. The waves crash relentlessly, each one a mirror of your hidden impulses, your secret fears, and your denied desires. You have spent a lifetime building sandcastles on the shore, convinced that they represent your strength, your identity, your mastery over the world. Yet the tide has been creeping in all along, reshaping your landscape, eroding your illusions. And now, at last, the truth becomes unavoidable. The ocean is not outside of you, it is inside. That restless, immeasurable force, the shadow, is not an enemy to conquer. It is the deepest part of your being, the source of your vitality, your creativity, and your capacity for transformation. To fight it is to resist life itself. To embrace it is to step into your own power. This is the ultimate revelation Jung offers. Freedom does not come from denying the darkness within, nor from hiding from it, nor from pretending it does not exist. Freedom comes from recognition, acceptance, and integration. The shadow is not something to destroy, but something to understand. It is the raw, untamed part of your psyche that, once illuminated, becomes the engine of your authentic self. Every anger you acknowledge, every fear you face, every impulse you own is fuel for becoming more fully human. And here lies the paradox that shakes the foundations of how you perceive yourself. The very qualities you have feared and repressed, the selfishness, the envy, the rage, also hold the keys to your strength, your insight, your courage, and your passion. To deny them is to remain incomplete. To embrace them is to become whole. Consider the implications. Every decision you thought was rational, every moral judgment you made, every relationship you navigated, every ambition you pursued, these were shaped, whether you realized it or not, by what you refused to see. Until now, much of your life may have felt like a carefully scripted play in which you believed you were the protagonist, unaware that a hidden character wrote the script behind the scenes. But once you acknowledge the shadow, the narrative changes. You no longer stumble blindly. You begin to act with awareness, choosing not from denial but from clarity. This is liberation in its rawest form, the freedom to direct your own life with knowledge of both light and dark within. Philosophically, this insight is radical. Nietzsche's proclamation, "Become who you are," resonates with renewed urgency when framed through the lens of the shadow. To become who you are requires facing the entirety of your being, including the impulses and instincts you would rather hide. Sartre's existential challenge, to live authentically in the face of freedom, becomes concrete when you realize that avoiding your shadow is a refusal of freedom itself. Even Schopenhauer's conception of the will gains new depth. The force within you that seemed blind and destructive is not a separate enemy, but a raw energy to be recognized, channeled, and transformed. Psychologically, the integration of the shadow reshapes every dimension of your existence. You no longer react unconsciously to others' behaviors because you understand the reflections of your own psyche in them. Jealousy becomes insight, anger becomes assertiveness, fear becomes awareness, shame becomes a teacher rather than a jailer. Life loses the oppressive weight of unacknowledged impulses because what was once hidden is now part of your conscious, creative power. You move through the world with the gravity of someone who knows themselves, fully and unflinchingly, not as a mask, but as an unbroken whole. There is also an ethical dimension. A person who has confronted their shadow is less likely to project their darkness onto others. Violence, hatred, envy, and judgment diminish when the internal war ends. By embracing your own darkness, you reduce the impulse to externalize it, contributing to a calmer, more conscious society. Liberation is not just personal, it is relational, cultural, even historical. Each individual who faces their shadow subtly shifts the world, introducing a ripple of awareness into the collective unconscious. But perhaps the most profound truth is this: the shadow is not merely a force of danger, but the wellspring of your most profound creativity and love. It contains the raw intensity of life itself, the passions and drives that once integrated can fuel art, innovation, deep empathy, and resilience. The very qualities you feared, when owned, transform into engines of vitality. Jung described this as the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming your whole self, shadow included. To walk this path is to move from fragmentation to wholeness, from fear to freedom, from unconscious reactivity to conscious choice. And so, standing at the edge of that inner ocean, you face the ultimate question. Will you continue to see yourself as merely the persona you present to the world, a fragile construction of safety and denial? Or will you dive into the waves, confront the darkness, and emerge knowing, finally, who you truly are? To embrace the shadow is to accept the paradox of human existence, that light and darkness are inseparable, that pain and growth are intertwined, that chaos and creativity are two sides of the same coin. The final realization is liberating and humbling in equal measure. You are neither fully good nor fully bad, neither fully in control nor fully victimized. You are a totality, a dynamic interplay of conscious and unconscious forces. To see this is to release the illusions of control and judgment, to step into a life lived fully, honestly, and courageously. You no longer fear the darkness because you know it intimately. You no longer chase external validation because you are grounded in internal truth. You no longer react unconsciously. because you are awake to the deeper currents of your own being. In this awakening, life becomes profound in ways you could never imagine. Every relationship, every decision, every encounter becomes an opportunity for reflection, choice, and growth. The shadow, once a source of fear and repression, becomes a partner in your evolution. The unseen puppeteer is revealed, and instead of surrendering to it, you dance with it. You have learned that to be truly free, you must embrace both your light and your darkness. Only then can you move through the world not as a divided self, but as a whole, powerful, and conscious human being. And in this truth lies the ultimate freedom, to live fully, unflinchingly, and authentically, guided not by illusions of control, but by the profound understanding that the shadow is not your enemy. It is the hidden source of everything you are capable of becoming.